So the last few days saw a number of incriminating articles released in American press, or of course American press, regarding the worst person on earth, which is the former U.S. soccer coach Jurgen Klinsmann. And naturally, there's I think some hint that Jurgen Klinsmann actually might be related to Hitler. No, it's a joke. Okay. So what are the articles about? Well, the articles that first came out on ESPN by Jeff Carlisle, and then came out in the Ringer by I think Anthony Helms. The last name is Helms. Essentially, give explanations why the United States soccer team has underachieved, and the sole culprit is Jurgen Klinsmann, who of course was fired with about a year to go in qualifying. And so in order to come up with this cockamamie stories, the both interviewers brought out a number of quotes from different people, none of whom seemed to be remotely interested in defending Jurgen Klinsmann, with the exception of Jeff Cameron, who was quite delighted to defend himself. So the two major points that have been brought up in these articles is that A, Jurgen Klinsmann was utterly disorganized in his soccer preparation, was completely scatterbrained, and could not organize the team according to the basic tactical principles that a head coach, should be clearly aware of. Now, the Ringer article brought up Kyle Martina, who was completely dissatisfied and struck unpleasantly, obviously, and not by flying debris, with Jurgen Klinsmann preparation, went on the air and announced some sort of a great, we had a diatribe or something like that against Klinsmann, that how incompetent and how disorganized and how Klinsmann was, and how disorganized and scatterbrained his practices were. The problem with that Kyle Martino theory, besides the fact that it comes from Kyle Martino, who is not to be given as much credence as some people do, is that during that era, which is 2013, the United States was in a very good run. So whatever scatterbrain meant to Kyle Martino was obviously very positive scatterbraining for the United States soccer team. Now, for those of you who don't recall, and of course now you could consult available information, but that when Bob Bradley was fired after losing to Mexico 2-4 in the final of the Gold Cup, the United States was ranked number 33, I believe, by ELO, which is an alternate and probably superior ranking system compared to FIFA zone. Beginning with 2011, when Klinsmann took over in October, and going to the World Cup of 2014, the United States, however imperfect, rose from 33 to 13. It was a 20-point job. It was one of the better performances by any coach around that time frame, and which led to United States Soccer Federation, in form of Sunil Gulati, offering Jurgen Klinsmann a new contract beginning in 2014. So that scatterbraining, which was combination of sort of people accusing Klinsmann of, people were accusing Klinsmann of inconsistencies and tactical unawareness based upon a blurb in Philipp Lahm's, who was a Bayern right fullback and Germany fullback, article that alluded that Klinsmann didn't really want to practice tactics, but they mostly practiced fitness. However, Philipp Lahm felt it was considered or taken as a gospel, and consequently a lot of stories that appeared in the U.S. media, which completely imbecilic, but that's the way they always are, took that as a gospel and kept purporting and kept spreading that claim that Jurgen Klinsmann knew nothing about tactical game. That's during the same time frame where the United States went from being 33rd to being the 13th. Nonetheless, that went on, that claim went on until the very end. Now, the second reason why that claim is idiotic is because Jürgen Klinsmann obviously felt at some point, and this is going to the World Cup of 2014, that there's something wrong with his tactical preparation, and something wrong was named Martin Vasquez. So when Martin Vasquez, whom he brought to Bayern from LA, and Martin Vasquez was assistant coach under Ziggy Schmidt, who was a friend of Klinsmann, and because he was unemployed, perhaps other reasons, Klinsmann took him with himself to Bayern in 2009 when he was hired by the Munich team. Allegedly, Uli Hoeneß, who was the general manager of the club, or chief operating officer, how I want to translate it into American sportnese, offered Klinsmann opportunity to stay and coach further, based on condition that he would let Martin Vasquez go, because Martin Vasquez either was not doing his job very well, or simply just had no respect because he was not doing his job very well. Klinsmann refused and was fired with 3 games to go. Then they brought in Jupp Heynckes to sort of write out the last 3 games of the season. Now, Bayern was in third when that happened. There's a different story whether an incompetent coach, even at a rich club like Bayern, could ride a team to the third place finish without having at least some competency as the head manager, as the leader of the club. Of course, we knew that from Bob Bradley, who could barely, keep Swansea at 0.8 of a point per match, which is not, which is where how you define incompetency. As Klinsmann was fired along with Vasquez, he waited out for, I guess, about 2 years where his Bayern contract expired and lobbied for the job with the United States. Obviously, it was very convenient for him. He lived in California. The center's in California. It's a short drive or whatever. And he did bring in Martin Vasquez with him. I personally was very disappointed that he brought in Martin Vasquez, because at the time there were a number of fairly qualified ex-German international who dipped their toes in the coaching market and had some experience, or a lot of experience, in various clubs all over the world. And I thought Klinsmann would bring along an experienced German assistant. This is a German coach who had experienced a number of levels, including international. There were players like Guido Buchwald, who went and won a Coach of the Year in Japan. There was Pierre-Michel Lidbarski. Both were his teammates in in 90, and they were really good players and competent, probably good coaches. There's also Tom Dooley, who's a former U.S. international, German-born, also residing in California, who probably has fairly decent handle on all things tactical, having played in a long time. Nonetheless, Klinsmann brought Martin Vasquez. However incompetent Martin Vasquez was perceived to be by the Bayern hierarchy and by Bayern players, the United States, as I've said a couple of minutes ago, kept on doing very well in terms of its international play. They beat Italy, they beat Germany, so they had some good results going from 2011 to 2014 World Cup. Now, obviously, at some point, Klinsmann was completely dissatisfied with Martin Vasquez for whatever reasons, and the reasons were never given, but considering that he was very loyal to his longtime assistant, the move was fairly unexpected. However, the person that he replaced him with had, on the other hand, superb pedigree, in my opinion, at least as an assistant coach. So Jürgen Klinsmann, Mr. Disorganization and Mr. Scatterbrain, ended up bringing in Bertie Vogts. Now, for those of you who don't know, and most of you do not know, Bertie Vogts was, first of all, a great player on the great German teams of the 1970s. A Euro winner in 72, the World Cup winner in 74, 2 times West German Player of the Year. After that, he went into coaching, and he was assistant coach to Franz Beckenbauer, and there are 86, 88, and 90 teams, 88, 86 and 90 World Cup, which they ended up winning in 90. And 88 Euros where they ended up in the semifinal, losing to Great Marco van Basten strike, and they lost to the Netherlands. After Beckenbauer resigned, or retired, semi-retired national position, Bertie Fox replaced him as a already German coach. West Germany and East Germany united. It became a united team, a united country, and of course a single team. Bertie Fox, as a coach, coached a 1992 team that went in the final of Euros, and then in 96 won the Euros. In other words, Bertie Fox was a Euro-winning coach, which is a far greater pedigree than anyone in the U.S. has ever approached. Any other coach in the U.S. has ever approached, with the exception of perhaps Carlos Alberto Pereira, who coached the New York Metro Stars for good money when he was the World Cup winning coach with Brazil. Nonetheless, he never coached the United States. So in terms of pedigree, Bertie Fox was a perfect hire, an experienced tactician who was going to help Klinsmann with his biggest shortcoming, allegedly. That hire, however, went completely by minds of the pitiful U.S. soccer journalism clique. I've even read that Bertie Fox was a great midfielder. Of course, he wasn't a midfielder, he was a great fullback. A great fullback who played in '74 World Cup final one-on-one against Johan Cruyff. That was his job, to man-mark Johan Cruyff. The narrative, even despite Bertie Fox hiring, never changed. Now you'd think if a great coach was going to be hired as an assistant, then people would take that into account. But they never took it. The articles on all the major news media kept continuing with the same narrative, because once they picked something out, it was considered convenient. Bertie Fox was never mentioned in the articles. I mean, once in a while, well, he brought in, who's this guy? We don't know the guy. Even though the pedigree and the experience were clearly there. Now, Bertie Fox may not be the greatest coach in the world. He may not be, he's not coaching Arsenal. He's not coaching Real Madrid. At the time, he was coaching Azerbaijan. But Azerbaijan thought he was a great coach. They didn't want him to go, but it's kind of a no-win situation. You make some money, the team isn't going anywhere because it's a small country. I mean, they're lucky to, finish 4th, 5th in their group. So it was no. So he quit and he joined Klinsmann's U.S. team. And this is where the biggest mistake the media made, at least to those people who actually know history of soccer, or understand history of soccer. Bertie Fox was a great hire, in my opinion. And certainly, in almost everyone's opinion, Bertie Fox is an experienced European coach who has earned a lot of plaudits during his career. I don't think he did well with Scotland or with Nigeria, but, that kind of stuff happens in various levels. The media persisted with the same narrative because, quite frankly, it may have been foolish in the first day, but it became triply foolish, idiotic, and moronic after Fox's hire. It didn't faze anybody. The same gaggle of journalists who went on originally opened with this nonsense about Klinsmann knowing nothing tactic, not caring about tactics, continue pushing these false stories. In other words, they pushed crap, the garbage. And that's what, but those United States fans who did not, perhaps, who also were newcomers to the game, kind of went along with it, in addition to a lot of people who were simply did not like Klinsmann because they liked Bradley, and whatever new guy replaced their guy, they were going to hate. So this is the first major point of these two stories by ESPN and by The Ringer that pretty much continued with the false narrative and pushed the false narrative, has been pushing the false narrative since 2011, and partially because it was directed by the USF to push this false narrative. Now, how do I know that? Well, at this point, Jurgen Klinsmann is still probably non-disclosure agreement because his contract is still through the World Cup. Once the World Cup is over, Klinsmann can respond to any accusation that are being levied against him. So the timing of these articles, which have no reason to the United States ongoing crisis, of which there are many, is obviously been directed by somebody, whether, I wouldn't say it was under orders, but certainly there was some sort of a coordinated attempt, so this type of information comes out at once over different platforms and given certain timing. It's no secret that Jurgen Klinsmann had made a lot of enemies. Some were due to his style, which perhaps not the most conjugative, I don't do verbs. But the other point is because United States Soccer Federation is controlled by MLS and Soccer United Marketing, two entities that are aligned two commercial entities that align far too closely with the non-commercial United States Soccer Federation. I've talked about it before, so we're going to skip that part of how they, suck off one another, suck off, money. Money goes from United States to MLS, from United States to some, etc., etc. But this brings out the second portion of the article, the gist of those articles, which was this. Jurgen Klinsmann brought in discontent and discombobulation and and any other disses and misses into the locker room. The German-American players that were born in Germany, raised in Germany, chose to play for the United States, was somehow not getting along with American players. Well, there was some sort of infighting and outfighting and pillow fighting and food fighting, and nobody got along. That is, of course, completely United States and some control. This is the second false narrative. That does not mean everybody got along, that everybody, hug one another and, and pet it in the head and in the butt and kissed in the cheek and all that stuff. I mean, these are grown men with their own lives. Most of them have wives. Some of them even have children with wives and wives with children. So it's not that everybody was going to work very much like kids in the kindergarten and march along in goose step and sing songs and everything. However, what it does do, it essentially slander those German Americans who chose to play for the United States. And additionally, it also slanders players like Aaron Johansson and Mick Diskerud, who are not German, but those being born in the United States but grown up in Europe. And essentially says you can't play, or you don't feel the same playing for the U.S. if you are German. Now, there were a number of instances where that had a small portion of truth. If you're born in Germany, you play in Germany, you make a lot of money playing in Germany, you don't want to necessarily fly to the United States for these matches against inferior foes. You don't want to be able to. You don't want to be taken out in the middle of the season where your club is the most vulnerable. These guys are making a very good living, but they're making a good living because they're performing on a weekly basis. So when we're not taken out of Germany or Norway or Scandinavia or whatever, and have to fly across the ocean, and sometimes they have to go from fairly frigid, or Germany is not exactly Cabo San Lucas. So we have to fly from fairly cold Germany in October, November, something like that, where it's maybe 50 degrees or 45 degrees, and you have to go to Costa Rica or Guatemala where it's 85 degrees and humid. They're not looking. I mean, it's just too much of a shock for them, and so there's some fairly reasonable way where some players aren't very enthusiastic about playing here, and of course they want to play in the World Cup. Nonetheless, when somebody says all, or implies that all German Americans were not on the same page as the real Americans, it really slanders those outside and those who chose to play for the U.S. Now the funny bit, and this is sort of a side story, is that one of the hottest prospects right now, I wouldn't say in the world, but certainly a very promising young prospect, is a triple national who has a Cameroonese, American, and French passport. And his name is Jordan Zipache. Well, Jordan, Jordi, spent last year in books at Rennes in the French second division. So Reims. Yes, screwed up. Well, Rennes now apparently is making a bid for him, and they offer something like $12 million, 12 million euros, like $13 million. Well, if you keep slandering German Americans, are you going to keep slandering French Americans? What sort of a recruitment tool is that to where, everything that went wrong with the U.S. soccer is a fault of damn foreigners? That's pretty much, if you're recruiting Reims, Sibacheu for Reims from Rennes, or vice versa, there is vice versa. I mean, what sort of a pitch do you hear from the U.S. media? And if you don't think it's relevant, you realize that based upon all top talent or top league U.S. team, half of it is almost half of it, now that Jermaine Jones retired, are German players, or at least could be German players. And then you put in, Icelandic Johansson, and, Discord is kind of flipped out. So in any case, 2 or 3 good players that are playing, say they're German-born or American-born, but raised in Germany or raised with German families and brought up in German soccer, those are very important cogs in an overall machine. So, now Klinsmann did not use, for example, Timothy Chandler much because he had DeAndre Yedlin. He used Chandler when Yedlin wasn't available. Sometimes it went well, sometimes it didn't. Once again, you bring a guy from a 50-degree temperature to the 80-degree temperature, he may not do very well, and the coach should account for that. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But the German versus German-American, or really German-American versus the American players, that narrative, once again, is pushed by United States Soccer Federation. Because that's the reason why they fired Klinsmann and replaced him with American coach Bruce Arena. They did not have to hire Bruce Arena. Jurgen Klinsmann, let's put a disclaimer, is not the greatest coach in the world. But he's probably a pretty competent coach given the proper assistant, proper structure. However, MLS was pushing the American narrative. It's American, and all foreigners are not, conducive to the game. We can do it ourselves. I mean, people who own MLS teams like Merritt Paulson, they were saying, how dare this guy say MLS is not a good league? MLS is a great league. Well, it's getting better, but it's not a great league. Obviously, Klinsmann was very clever. Okay, he wasn't very clever because it was obvious. Because Arena said it before, and because Mexican coaches like Ricardo Lavolpe used to say it over a decade ago, we want players in Europe. When I want them playing in the Mexican league. All the Russians, because they're paid so well by Vladimir Putin and his men, Muslim men, they want their players in Europe, but the European clubs can't pay those players the same amount of money that they're making in Russia. Not if you account for taxes and cost of living. So those guys are stay at home. Well, MLS is sort of worked like Mexican League or Liga MX or like the Russian League or like where they essentially made it worthwhile for players to play in MLS, even though MLS is not a top quality league. That's the problem. Klinsmann wanted him there. MLS owners and USSF and Sam and Don Garber wanted him here. That's the problem. So how do you make him come here? You give him more money. What if the players aren't worth that kind of money? You up the ante. You make sure that they come back for real big wage. And that's a problem. That was the major problem with MLS. somebody did bring the entitlement that American players have, that they've gotten soft. Well, how could they not get soft? The poster child or poster boy for American soccer for about a decade and a half was Landon Donovan. Now, what is Landon Donovan known for? Well, he ran from Germany in 2001. He ran from Germany in 2005. He completely flaked out in World Cup 2006 because he was under weird mental strain. Now, he didn't have a good 2010 because he did go to Europe to Everton for like half a year, so he was kind of in the fighting shape. But when he came back, and after 2010 World Cup, what did Donovan do? Well, he flaked out in 2011 Gold Cup, and he decided to go to his sister's wedding because it was important. The team wasn't important. His wedding at the time, it couldn't be, of course, delayed, postponed, or moved to whatever they were playing. That was important. And of course, in 2013, he went on a long sabbatical, or 12-13, where he didn't come back for about half a year, even though the team needed him. Besides the LA Galaxy, which is kind of irrelevant, the national team was fighting for a qualification. But he didn't care. He had to get his own head straight. Now, these days he admits to being depressed, to needing some sort of mental help, which is fine. But the problem is, whenever Donovan came back, he was given a lot of money, treated like a king. He was worshipped by the U.S. media. He had a lot of personal fans because he's Mr. Cute, and he had female fans and so on and so forth. So he was coddled. He was worshipped to the point where Bruce Arena couldn't even take him out of the game, even though he was just not playing well, but he was just kind of lollygagging along. And he, an Italy game aside, which was kind of the short-handed game, it was three red cards. He had a horrible 2006, but he was the star. So Bruce Arena couldn't do anything about it. Bob Bradley, who in 2011 probably would have liked to show him like who the boss is, couldn't because the boss is USSF, and USSF is Soccer United Marketing. So Soccer United Marketing wanted Donovan in the game. They made the guy who flaked out the hero. And this brings us to 2014, when Jurgen Klinsmann essentially told Donovan that he's going to shape up or he's going to get shipped out. Donovan never shaped up. And he got shipped out. And that killed Klinsmann. The United States, or whatever the people, United States Soccer Federation, the people who are around him, will never admit that that was the move. But of course it was the move. The reason he got rid of Klinsmann is because he got rid of Donovan. And Donovan, besides being the poster child of MLS and serving as a sort of big marketing type of a head force, whatever you want to call it, Donovan was everything MLS aspired to be. He had somebody who performed well at various World Cups. He was a local guy. He was an all-time leading goal scorer. And of course, they ended up naming MLS MVP award after Donovan. Simply, Donovan could not lose his spot. Klinsmann may have been allowed not to play him for 90 minutes, but Donovan had to be on the team according to the bosses, which sort of reminds me of some old, it was Richard Nixon jokes, who was friend with Edgar Bennett Williams and who owned then Washington baseball teams, what they call it, Generals, not General, whatever they were. And he told him how to, he called a certain game from the from on top. Well, it may work in some American cities. It doesn't work if you're a foreign coach. You're not going to get dictated by who's going to play on your team. It doesn't matter if you're, where you're working. We're working for a club or you're working for a national team. You set up your team. You're responsible for it. And that's what I rated the USSF and some. They wanted certain players in the team, and they wanted certain coach in the team. So the crisis was semi-artificial. In other words, they wanted Donovan and whoever coaching the team, rather than Klinsmann and whoever was playing for the team. Now this brings us 2015-16. Now in 2015, U.S., having done fairly well at 2014 World Cup, is introducing new players. So Klinsmann trying, Jazzy Sardes and Ethan Finlay and various young players who potentially could step into the shoes and become either starters, contributors, or whatever. And so he doesn't quite blow up the 2015 Gold Cup, but he certainly plays a number of formations. They don't look all that great early on, but they actually begin to look a little better. They begin to look a little better toward the end. And of course, there was a famous loss to Jamaica. Now, they didn't look good versus Jamaica, but they actually looked better than Jamaica looked. In other words, there was a weird, free kick given and Brett Guzan tossing the ball out, which is I've never seen, given, unless the guy was like 3 yards out of the penalty box, which he wasn't. Yeah. So it was, a curious referee decision. Sometimes things happen. So U.S. kind of mailed into 2015 Gold Cup, which once again was irrelevant in the great picture, but gave the United States Soccer Federation, quote unquote, a plausible reason to get rid of Klinsmann, even though he was in full contract. So of course they cannot get rid of Klinsmann and replace him with another foreign coach, because they have a narrative going that foreign coach is no good. So they bring in Bruce Arena. Now Bruce Arena, in his book, says that they were going to replace Klinsmann. They're going to bring him instead of Klinsmann in the spring of 2016, but couldn't do it because of Dan Flynn, the chief, I guess, operating officer, whatever you want to call it, had to have heart replacement surgery, which was, an important thing. But here's where Bruce Arena, or he may have been told that, is full of crap. Bruce Arena could have been hired before Copa Centenario. The problem was if Bruce Arena fell on his face, which was something that had to be a concern for United States Soccer Federation, and they would have to make a decision again, or conceivably go into the hexagonal, the final stage of the qualifying. So their option was keep Klinsmann. Now, if he sucked, if the United States didn't play well, then it would be easy to replace Klinsmann after the Copa Centenario. But he didn't suck. The United States made it into semifinal. So they couldn't hire Bruce Arena before it, and they couldn't hire him immediately after that. So they had to wait. And as Michael Corleone says, you can't wait. Well, they, of course, had to wait because their political stars weren't aligning. So they had to bring in Arena only if Klinsmann had a bad opening to the qualifying. Now, the way the qualifying is set up is a bit of a rig too. I mean, and CONCACAF is known for that, of course, FIFA is known for that. In other words, the opening matches for the United States and Mexico were harder than the closing matches. Now, United States Open at home versus Mexico, which has been playing much better under Osorio. Didn't play well at the Copa Centenario, but they were playing much better under Osorio. They seemed organized, and he seemed to be fairly professorial in his look. And then they went to Costa Rica, where they never win. So 2 of the 3 hardest matches were match day 1, match day 2. Now, if you look at the closing of the scheduling, it's at home versus Panama and away Trinidad, 2 of the easiest matches. Now, why is it doing it? Well, partially it's because they want to keep the group appear competitive. If you allow the top teams blow away their fairly inferior foes from day 1, then people lose the interest. People, stop going to matches, etc., etc. So, in terms of marketing, they set up those 2 of the toughest matches as the opener. Now, Klinsmann happened to have lost 1 match narrowly, even though he actually outplayed Mexico for about half of the match. And ended up a disaster in Costa Rica. Well, once again, if all the problems existed on the United States team, they probably would have never been capable of outplaying Mexico, which they did when they were down 1-0, and they tied it. They created more goal-scoring chances until the very final moment where Rafa Marquez headed the ball and Mexico won. Now, there were disasters in Costa Rica, so to some extent, you can feel that firing was completely undeserved. The problem was the replacement. MLS, Sunil Gulati, Don Garber, some had no choice but to bring an American coach. And an American coach had to be Bruce Arena because Bob Bradley was coaching in France, and then he was moving to Swansea City, which is a different story. And so they had to bring in Arena, regardless of Arena's record. And as I pointed before, Arena's record in international competition, even a very low-quality CONCACAF, was rather iffy. In other words, he lost to Santos 4-0, he lost to Club Tijuana. I mean, he wasn't really like setting the world on fire. The only titles he was winning was MLS, and that's because he had, double or triple apparel of an average MLS club. Quadruple apparel of an average MLS club. So he was giving, all the goodies with which he could win besides home field advantage and medals. Anyway, they had no choice. So all the stories that there was a rancor among, German kids and American kids or other kids and some other kids, that was all pretty much a fake. Everything was designed to move out a foreign-born coach. It was designed to move out Klinsmann. It was designed to move out Fox and Andy Herzog, who was hands-on assistant. Tab Ramos, as you see, was kept on because Tab Ramos was an American. Well, they got what they wanted. The fans, U.S. soccer fans, who wanted Klinsmann's ouster, they also got what they wanted. They got an American coach. They also got played out of the World Cup because American coach and very comfortable American players, some of whom way beyond their date of expiration, including especially Tim Howard. Those players once again had to play because he could not play those who were in Europe. He had to play those who were in America. Fabian Johnson, stay in Germany. Daniel Williams, stay in England. Matt Miazga, well, you're in Netherlands and you played for Poland when you were a kid. You stay there. And so the whole, Weston McKennie, I mean, he'll forget about it. And so they played American players, they played MLS players. They got destroyed. They did not qualify for the World Cup. And now the aftermath of these events was that they don't feel compelled to hire the best coach. They feel compelled to hire an American coach. Now, so the name being brought up is Greg Berhalter, whose sole experience in Europe as a coach, now he played for about 15 years there, but as a coach, he coached in Sweden's second division. It's called Superettan. And he got fired because Hammarby, where he coached, didn't do well, so he got fired by Hammarby. And the reason he got hired there because Hammarby is partially owned by AEG, which is the same company that owns LA Galaxy. It's a Phil Anschutz company, Anschutz Entertainment, something global, I don't know. So now you're going to have an American coach with American players, and good luck trying to convince any European players that they ought to fly over. And that's going to give a new set of problems, and chances are the United States is going to have a really difficult time in next few competition. Now, the one positive side, if there is one, on Greg Berhalter is he's going to come in cheap. So if he's not going to do well, he can be replaced later on. The major competitions that the qualifying for the World Cup begins in 2019 after the end of the Gold Cup. So if he doesn't do well in the Gold Cup, he'll probably be canned and somebody more experienced will be brought in. If someone more experienced won't deal with the United States and all that nonsense. And we'll see if that will be the case, because I think the problems the United States Soccer Federation, well, the old line goes, you ain't seen nothing yet. There is more to come.